If you're interested in your physical health, where would you go? To the doctor? Probably. If you're interested in your spiritual health, where would you go? Church. So that's where you are. But would you ever think of going to church to talk about your physical health? Now, there are some churches that would talk about healing. Maybe you would do that. But how about just going to church and hearing about your physical health in general? Well, welcome to today, because that's what we're going to do. I want to talk to you today about your physical health from the book of Proverbs. Now, as you know, we've been going through Proverbs a topic at a time, and there's a topic we haven't even come close to talking about, and it has to do with, that talks about emotions, and it talks about the way you think, and then it talks about the effect of those things on the body. So I'm calling that the effects on your physical health. So what I want us to do is look at those proverbs that talk about those things that deal with our physical health. Now, before I do, let me mention one other thing. If you were going to talk about your physical health, there were some things that would affect it negatively, right? Like an automobile accident, or maybe something like falling and breaking a bone. Tiger Woods just had an automobile accident, and he broke his leg, and the bone was sticking through the skin. Just the thought of that gave me a pain. Or you could come in contact with COVID. Now, all of those are negative. But there are positive things you could do, like improve your diet. As a matter of fact, before the service, I was talking to a lady in the congregation, and she was telling me she lost weight. And I said, "How did you do it?" And she said, "I quit eating potato chips and some other things." But diet would do it. Or how about some exercise? Would that be a positive effect on your health? Or maybe getting more sleep. I think we don't pay enough attention to sleep. I think that impacts us more than we are aware of. It's restorative. The body heals itself while we're sleeping, according to a lot of people. So maybe we should improve our health by getting more sleep. Now, what I just did is talk about negative and positive things on your physical health. I want you to list some more things like that. What would you put on the list? Now, this could be endless, but you could list all kinds of things that would affect you, right? Proverbs talks about some things that probably wouldn't make it to your list. It talks about some of our attitudes, and those attitudes can affect us negatively, and it can affect us positively. So in going through all these verses in Proverbs, I'm going to divide it into those two categories: the negative and the positive effect our attitude has on our physical health. So the question is, what are those negative things that can affect us? And what are those positive things in the area of our mental attitude that can affect us? All right, with that in mind, turn with me, if you will, to Proverbs 17:22. Proverbs 17:22 says, "A merry heart does good like medicine." I'll get to that in a minute, later. But what I want to look at now is the last part of that verse. "But a broken spirit dries the bones." Now, if anything, this verse, as much as any, clearly indicates that as far as Solomon is concerned, there is a connection between a broken spirit, your attitude, your emotions, and your body, here called drying up your bones. So this verse is clearly teaching that a broken spirit can have adverse effects on your body. that one's inner life affects his physical well-being, that a broken spirit can zap you of your physical energy. You ever had that happen? You ever just had a great disappointment or going through a very difficult time and were down emotionally and it affected you physically? All of us have experienced that. Well, that's the kind of thing that this is talking about. Now, I want you to look at another verse. Look at Proverbs 14:30. Proverbs 14:30 says, "A sound heart is life to the body." We'll get to that later. Right now we're talking about the negative things. So look at the last part of this verse. "But envy is rottenness to the bones." Proverbs 17:22 spoke in general terms about a broken spirit. Proverbs 14:30 gets more specific and talks about envy. Actually, this Hebrew word is capable of several nuances, including jealousy and even anger. At any rate, this translation, the New King James translation, which I use, translates it envy. Envy is that ardent, aggravating desire to have or achieve what one sees in others. And according to this verse, it produces adverse effects physically. Somebody said envy eats like a consuming disease into the very bones and marrow of a man's life. So all I've done so far is just point out that these two proverbs are saying, in essence, that your attitude, whether it's your mental attitude, your emotions, can affect you physically. Agree? Now, I find, as a matter of fact, I was studying something else. I wasn't thinking about Proverbs, and I stumbled upon a New Testament illustration of this. Paul went to the city of Corinth, and he founded a church there. He then left, and through various means, found out that there were all kinds of problems in that church that deeply concerned him. Some were a general report, some were questions that they sent to him. At any rate, he heard that there were problems. So what he did is he wrote a letter. We call that 1 Corinthians. And he said some pretty stern things in that letter. And after he sent it to the church, he became concerned about how they would respond to those things that he said, those stern things. Now, he needed to say them. They should have been said. He just became concerned. So, according to 2 Corinthians, he was very concerned about that. So he sent Titus to find out how they responded. And then, and I'm getting this from 2 Corinthians, he went to Troas expecting to find Titus and to find out what the report was from the church at Corinth. When he got to Troas, he couldn't find Titus. And so the text of 2 Corinthians chapter 2 says that he had no rest in his spirit. No rest in his spirit. This is internal things going on, and he was disturbed because he was concerned about the believers in the church at Corinth. So he left Troas, and then he went to Macedonia. And when he got to Macedonia, he didn't find Titus. So he says in chapter 7 that he had no rest in his body, in his flesh, according to one translation. Interesting. His concern, his legitimate concern for the church at Corinth had an effect on his body. As a matter of fact, one commentator says of that statement in chapter 7, intense anxiety affected both flesh and spirit. I just thought it was interesting that the Apostle Paul experienced the negative effects of just being anxious and concerned about believers in the city of Corinth. So, what I've said so far, simply put, is the Bible recognizes that emotions affect the body. So, the emotions, calling it the attitude, could be your mental frame of mind, can affect your physical health. Now, I've known for a long time that Proverbs taught this, but I got involved in saying, well, just what affects the body and who says it? And all I could find in Proverbs was things like envy and a broken spirit. Are there other things that could affect the body? What are they? And one of the things I discovered is this is not just an idea limited to the book of Proverbs. Throughout history, people have said that your inner attitude can affect your physical body. For example, there's an Arabic version of 1430, Proverbs 14:30, that says, envy is like a moth within you that eats away. The Targums, which is an ancient explanation of the Jewish scriptures in common language, says, as rottenness to the wood, so as envy to the bones. So they use the rottenness in wood to illustrate the rottenness in your attitude. No less than Socrates said, envy is the daughter of pride, the author of murder and revenge, the father of secret treason, the perpetual tormentor of virtue. Envy is the filthy slime of the soul, a poison, a quicksilver, which consumes the flesh and dries up the marrow of the bones. So Socrates said that your attitude could affect your body. There's a commentator in the 19th century I've quoted several times in this series. His name is Wardlaw. And he, commenting on 1430, said this: the connection is imminent between mind and body, between the spirit and the tabernacle in which it resides. They mutually affect each other. He goes on to say that the expression rottenness to the bone describes not merely a surface sore, but a deep-seated disease that, like inflammation in the substance of the bone itself, it burns and destroys inwardly. So then I decided, looking at some of the stuff in history, what do modern commentators say about this? And they get more specific. For example, one said, envy and passions are bad for a person's health. And he quotes a doctor who confirms this by saying emotional disturbance causes disease. Another said that envy affects you physically, which we have already seen. Or another, to nurse resentment is bad for the body as well as the soul. And another said that it saps a person's vitality. Another, nothing as such as a direct tendency to ruin health and waste out life as grief, anxiety, fretfulness, bad temper. All these work death. Now, I thought that comment was particularly interesting for two reasons. One is that it got more specific, and it mentions things like grief. We've all had a loss, especially the loss of a loved one that affected us physically. I think that should go in the category. Anxiety, that's what Paul talked about. Bad temper, Bad temper could affect your physical health? Boy, that ought to motivate you not to pop your cork. But the other thing that interested me about that particular fellow was he said, all these work death. So can these emotions give you disease and death? Is it just a mild consequence, or could it get more serious, like causing a disease or even death? I kept digging. Found another commentator who said, emotions can make you ill. They can make hair fall out by the handful, bring on splitting headaches, clog nasal passages, make eyes and nose water, tighten the throat, make the skin break out in a rash, and even cause teeth to fall out. Emotions can plague one's inside with ulcer, give wives miscarriages, and make husbands impotent, and more. Quote, emotions can kill. Now, when I got to that quote, and I respect that commentator a lot, he doesn't go into extreme thoughts at all. I thought, is it that serious? I mean, can your negative attitude affect you physically to the point that it can make your teeth fall out? Where did he get that? But what interests me more is he says, quote, emotions can kill. Wow. Death. Is that going too far? So at that point, I asked myself, what does medical science say? And then it got interesting. I had in my file, under these verses, anticipating someday that I would preach on these verses, a quotation from a medical doctor who became a preacher, a pastor, a Bible teacher. And here's what he said. Now, this one is a little old. He says, quote, worry hurts you. It does not help you. The expression worried sick is more than a figure of speech. There is evidence that anxiety is detrimental to health. Research conducted at Columbia University has demonstrated that even mild worry can affect one's eyesight. At a British clinic, an examination of 500 patients confirmed that more than 1/3 of their visual problems were caused by emotional tension. Studies by Dr. Marvin J. Schoenberg and R.G. Martin indicate that in certain cases, glaucoma and even hysterical blindness can result from reasoning fear. Tests conducted at Cornell University Medical School indicate that the brain's ability to function is seriously hampered if one is overburdened with the stresses of life. The power of concentration, memory, creative thinking, and the ability to learn are all adversely affected. A survey of about 500 students in 21 different colleges confirm that the worriers get the lowest grades. End of quote. Now that one was a few years ago, so I decided to Google it. So I put in, can your mental attitude affect you physically? And I got over 600 million hits in 5 seconds? Now, I didn't have time to look them all up. But what I did discover was this. A section on health at the University of Minnesota website says, quote, and this is current, negative attitudes and feelings of helplessness and hopelessness can create chronic stress, which upsets the body's hormonal balance, depletes the brain chemistry required for happiness, and damages the immune system. Chronic stress actually decreases our lifespan. Wow. Then it goes on to say that science has identified certain stresses in the DNA which cause us to, quote, age more quickly. Now, this is getting serious. It could cause death. I mean, can you really say that it can cause serious physical problems and even physical death? I mean, it just seemed to me that was a bit of a stretch. So I kept digging. Now, I then found the Cleveland Clinic. U.S. News and World Report puts out a report every year on the best hospitals, and they rank them. The Cleveland Clinic for the year 2020 was ranked as the second best hospital in the United States, and when it came to heart, the number one hospital in the United States. Now, if you know anything at all about the Cleveland Clinic, it has a world reputation. People from all over the world go there. It is an outstanding hospital. It's called a clinic, but it's a hospital. All right, here is what the Cleveland Clinic said. Quote, "Many people have wondered before, is it possible to die of a broken heart? And although the idea seems far-fetched and like it's straight out of a romantic novel or book, experts say it could happen. Oh yes, in fact, you can die of a broken heart, but it's extremely unlikely. It's called the broken heart syndrome, and it can happen when an extremely emotional or traumatic event triggers a surge of stress hormones. These hormones can put you in short-term heart failure, which can be life-threatening. Strong negative emotions like depression, anger, and fear also have been linked to heart disease. How can grief initiate a heart attack? For reasons that we are not well understood, a person can experience a huge surge of adrenaline that can stimulate a heart attack. The heart muscle stops contracting and will appear to be a heart attack, and even when an electrocardiogram is performed. Most of the time, when the spasms relax and blood flow resumes, the heart failure will usually resolve. If the heart failure doesn't improve, it could cause death in extremely rare cases. Can depression increase your heart disease risk? People with depression have an increased likelihood of developing heart disease and vice versa. If you have heart disease, you're at risk of becoming depressed. The link is strong enough that anyone with depression should be screened for heart disease, and heart patients should be evaluated for depression. How can anger and fear affect your blood pressure? Negative emotions cause blood pressure to rise and the likelihood of blood clots, explains one doctor at the Cleveland Clinic. That's why stressful emotions can trigger a heart attack in people who are vulnerable. End of quote. Is this scary? I mean, could this make you think twice about those negative emotions that you harbor? One commentator gave some illustrations of emotions causing death. He says, and I quote, Dr. Paul Adolph tells of an elderly patient who was recovering satisfactorily in a hospital from a broken hip. When it was time for her to go home, her daughter told her that the arrangements had been made for her to be put in an old people's home, Within a few hours, the patient showed general physical deterioration, and she died in less than a day, not of a broken hip, but of a broken heart. A man who had faced horrors of the concentration camp with gallantry discovered after his release that it was his own son who had informed on him. The discovery beat him to his knees, and he died. He could beat the attack of an enemy, but the attack of one whom he loved killed him. End of quote. Now, I've gone at length to do this because I want it to make an impact. This is not something that we should treat lightly. I think that, I can stand up here and say, as I have, anger is something you should deal with. Don't let the sun go down on it. Don't be anxious. There are all kinds of things that are spiritually detrimental to your spiritual life and health. But suppose I stood up here and said, can affect you physically. Would that make any difference? It should. It's in the Proverbs. There can be negative emotions that can affect you physically. Now, I began by saying that it works both ways. This is a two-edged sword. That those mental attitudes, mental frame of mind, emotions, can also affect you positively. So let's look at some Proverbs that say that. Look at Proverbs 14:3. Proverbs 14:3 says, "A sound heart is life to the body, but envy is rottenness to the bones." Now we've seen about envy being rottenness to the bones. This says a sound heart is life to the body. Now, in going through the negative emotions, I ended with, it could cause death. This verse says it could also cause life. A sound heart. Heart probably refers to the inner person, including the mind, the emotions, and the will. The Hebrew word indicates that. Sound, the Hebrew word, means healing, cure, health. So, this is clearly saying a sound inner attitude, including your mental attitude and your emotional state of being, can bring life to the body. One commentator said that a heart of health is one in which all the emotions and appetites are in healthy equilibrium. Another talked about a healthy disposition, and a healthy heart is a positive mental attitude and healthy emotions that bring life to the body. Or look at Proverbs 18:14. It says, "The spirit of a man will sustain him in sickness, but who can bear a broken heart?" Now, we've looked at the broken heart, but look at this. The spirit of a man can sustain him in sickness. It seems to me that, being a pastor for many, many decades, you see sick people who their attitude just was terrible. Some people are not happy unless they're unhappy. And you wonder if that didn't contribute to where they are. And then on the other hand, you see people who maybe had the same problem and they have a great attitude. And they seem to get along a lot better. So it can bring either death or life to the individual. Concerning this proverb we just looked at, one commentator said, "A man sustains the ills in his body and the trials of life by the strength and energy of his mind. But if the mind be cast down, if slow consuming care and grief have shot the dagger into the soul, what can then sustain the man? Nothing but the unseen God. Therefore, let the afflicted pray. Thought that was an interesting comment, because this is going to affect your body. And ultimately, he's pointing you to the Lord. Another proverb, 15:13, says, this one you've heard many times, a merry heart makes a cheerful countenance, but by sorrow the heart of the spirit is broken. Now, we've looked at the last part of this and the negative effects, but listen to this. A merry heart shows itself by a smile on your face. That's what that verse is saying. As a matter of fact, it's saying a man's countenance is an index of his spirit. It is not natural for people to smile when they're not happy. So if there's a happy heart, a merry heart, there's a smile on your face. Sometimes when I'm preparing these studies, I will ask people like my wife or some of my close friends, here's what I'm preaching on Sunday, what's your knee-jerk reaction? And I said that to my wife, and she said, oh, your emotions show themselves on your face. She said, that's true. You know, when the jury comes back and they all look at their faces and they can tell what the verdict's going to be by the expression on their faces. Not bad. And I said, by the way, are you aware Proverbs says that? Yes. A smile on your face is probably, not always, an indication of a merry heart. But turn it around. A merry heart can produce a smile on your face. Or look at Proverbs 17:22. Proverbs 17:22 says, a merry heart does good like medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones. Now, we started with this verse and looked at the second half. I want to focus on the first half. A merry heart does good like medicine. Now, let's think about this. What we've seen is that your attitude can affect you negatively, and your attitude can affect you positively. But what I find interesting is that the positive attitude could actually help correct the negative consequences of a bad attitude. Let's call it medicine. I think I'll practice medicine. Wouldn't it be great to go in the hospital and say, I'm not a faith healer. I'm very skeptical of faith healers. But let me give you a little secret to help you get out of here. How about changing your attitude? That's medicine, according to the Proverbs. It's medicine. A merry heart is like a medicine. It can work healing. A cheerful disposition, one has said, is a powerful aid to healing. A cheerful heart is not only good for the soul, it's good for the body. One said this. I was aware of this. I'm going to quote him instead of what I've heard. Today's doctors tell us that a healthy laughter is great exercise. When you have a healthy laughter, they say, your diaphragm descends deep into your body and your lungs expand, greatly increasing the amount of oxygen taking into them. At the same time as it expands sideways, the diaphragm gives your heart a gentle, rhythmic massage. The noble organ responds by beating faster and harder. Circulation speeds up. Liver, stomach, pancreas, spleen, and the gallbladder are all stimulated. Your entire system gets an invigorating lift. all of which confirms the old Greek proverb that says, well, as a matter of fact, what Aristotle said about laughter, that it is a bodily exercise precious to health. Did you get all that? Did I go through that too fast? Let me start with Aristotle. Aristotle said that bodily exercise is precious to health. And he said laughter is an exercise. And what I just read you was an explanation of how a good belly laugh exercises the internals of your body. Is that interesting or what? So we need to laugh more. The man that is credited with bringing the study of humor into the medical mainstream is a fellow named Norman Cousins. Have you ever heard of Norman Cousins? He was a former editor of Saturday Review and later a faculty member at UCLA Medical School. He wrote a book, The Anatomy of an Illness, and he describes an unusual approach to his own self-treatment. Here is what happened. He developed a disease that was a rare type of arthritis that causes a lot of pain and stiffness in the spine. He determined that large dosages of vitamin C and a steady diet of watching his favorite Max Brothers movie and Candid Camera episodes gave him extended periods of pain relief. It became his quest to prove a biochemical link between laughter and fighting serious disease. There is a link between laughter and the levels of stress hormones and immune cell activity. Samples taken from subjects watching self-selected videotapes of comedy showed decreased levels of stress hormones and increased immune cell activity. Having a sense of humor doesn't mean knowing how to tell a joke. It is being able to see the humor in life. It is seeing humor rather than the horror. It is using humor to keep a positive perspective. So, we need to laugh. It's good medicine for your body as well as your spirit. One more proverb. 15:30. Listen to this. The light of the eyes rejoices the heart, and a good report makes the bones healthy. What an interesting way to put it. A good report makes the bones healthy. The light of the eye, referring to the twinkle in the eye, a smile on the face, can actually bring joy to the heart of someone else. Hearing good news is good for the body. It makes a man's whole being feel good. Now, we have all experienced that. Can you remember the times, and there are hundreds of times and more, that you've heard something good and just immediately felt better? I think a classic illustration, at least for some people, is you have a favorite team and they're in a very important game, and the score goes back and forth and back and forth, and as it does, the tension builds up and up and up, and then all of a sudden it's in the last minute of the game and they make the winning score, and you just feel it physically. You're elated. You can jump up and down, but you feel it physically. That's a good report that made you feel better. So, this says, the light of the eye, the twinkle of the eye rejoices the heart, apparently in other people. Matter of fact, I remember talking to a fellow once years ago, who was going through some very tough times, including a divorce. And he said to me, matter of fact, when he said it, it struck me as a little odd, and it's how I remember it. He said, I walked in a store and a lady smiled at me and I felt better. I thought, oh, you got to be kidding me. You're really desperate for something. If a smile makes you feel better. But you know it's true. This proverb says it's true. A twinkle of the eye and a good report can have physical effects. Now, earlier I quoted the Cleveland Clinic. I didn't finish the article. I gave all the negative things they talked about, and that's on their website. But here is the conclusion, very short. On the flip side, the Cleveland Clinic says, positive emotions can help people with heart disease live longer. People with strong social networks and close emotional ties to others have less heart disease and tend to fare better if they do develop heart disease. All right. The sum of everything I've said is real simple. The mind and the emotions can affect the body, both positively and negatively. Are we agreed? So what are you going to do with this? It's interesting, but what are you going to do with it? The way to avoid the negative emotions, negative effects of a negative attitude is to enjoy the positive benefits of a positive attitude. Is that the conclusion? So just have positive thinking? Well, I'm going to conclude by making a suggestion. I want you to turn to Philippians chapter 4. Philippians chapter 4. I think that the book of Proverbs deals with this subject in very general terms. I want to give you something very specific to do. Proverbs chapter 4, and look at verse 6. I've actually suggested that you memorize these two verses. I'm going to suggest it again. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are noble, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things of a good report, if there's any virtue, if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. Now, verse 8 is basically saying you should have a positive attitude, which comes from thinking about things that are praiseworthy. But what I want to point out is in verse 6. Look at it carefully. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. The one thing I'd like to leave you with today is with thanksgiving. I'd like to reduce everything I've said down to this. You want to develop a positive state of mind that can have positive consequences on your body? Develop an attitude of gratitude. Just go around being grateful. Even in situations that would cause anxiety, which is what this verse is talking about, pray, but do it with thanksgiving. So just learn to be thankful. Let me ask you a question. How many times a day do you thank the Lord? Is that a practice of yours? I assume you do it, somebody held up 3 fingers. I assume you do it 3 times when you pray for eating, right? You at least do it then, right? Well, I think it should be a habit. I don't know how many times a day I thank the Lord, but it's more than 3. Sometimes I forget, but I thank the Lord when the car starts. That's because, I'm dead serious, that's because I was headed for church one Sunday morning and it didn't start. So especially on Sunday morning when the car starts, I say, Lord, thank you. So far, so good. And I live in Southern California, and so do you. I thank the Lord when I find a parking place. You ever done that? Have you ever prayed for a parking place? I do it all the time. And then when I find one, I say, Lord, thank you. It's amazing how that works. And then when I park the car, I thank the Lord that I had a safe trip. Because I remember the time that my wife and I were on the way to church and a lady ran a red light and spun us around in the middle of the intersection. You thank the Lord for a safe trip. Those are just some simple examples. Lost my keys. Lord, where did I put the keys? And you find them and say, Lord, thank you. You do that? Develop an attitude of gratitude. But it's not just the positive thinking of verse 8. It's not just the attitude of gratitude in verse 6. Look at verse 13. I can do all things through Christ who gives me the strength. Ultimately, everything in this book is about a relationship with the Lord. So you can be grateful and leave the Lord out. I think I've met some people who were grateful and they didn't even know the Lord. So thank the Lord. Thank the Lord. He personally gives you the strength. He personally gives you peace that's beyond explaining or even understanding. It's like trying to tell somebody what an orange tastes like when they've never tasted an orange. So develop your relationship with the Lord with an attitude of gratitude. It's the Lord that's the answer to this. Not just a positive attitude and not even just being grateful. It's knowing Him and being thankful for what He does in your life. There is a verse tucked away in the Old Testament that sums it all very well. It's not just obeying the Word of God, it's trusting the God of the Word. The verse is in 1 Samuel chapter 30, and it says, Now David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him. Because of the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord. Very stressful situation. They were going to stone him. And he said, he strengthened himself in the Lord. Father, thank you for the insight into things spiritual and physical. Thank you for these reminders that our attitude does make a difference, even physically. But Lord, thank you as well that you're there, that you provide strength, that we can do all things through you. Thank you for this reminder that we're to be grateful to you. In Jesus' name.